A low, shuddering wind crawled across the abandoned courtyard, carrying with it the scent of iron, wilted roses, and something far older than the night itself. And if you listen closely, you can still hear the echo of the moment a desperate woman whispered a name no mortal was meant to speak. But before I tell you how she reached the Vampire King's altar with nothing left but blood, terror, and a final plea, let me warn you. This is a story of cruelty, ancient debts, and a rescue that no one in the kingdom saw coming. And if you believe no one deserves to suffer alone in silence, then make sure to like and subscribe, because what happened to Alara is a reminder of how far hope will go when pushed to its breaking point. Her story begins in the shadow-choked halls of Varan Estate, where Alara moved like a ghost, careful to breathe only when it was safe. I remember the night her life splintered, not because it was the first time Lord Varan's cruelty shattered bone or spirit, but because it was the first time she realized he meant to break something deeper, her soul. Alara had always been quiet by nature, gentle as the evening rain that swept across the village rooftops, healing those who visited her herb shed, whispering comfort to children with fevers, smoothing lavender salves onto blistered hands. But gentleness, in a house ruled by a man like Varan, was a vulnerability he carved into with pleasure. That evening, as the moon bled red through the high, narrow windows, he dragged her into the cellar, the one villagers whispered about, the one with the heavy oak door and the faint scratching beneath the stones. She tried not to look at the symbols smeared across the walls, symbols she once saw in forbidden books warning of blood rites and shadow binding. Varan's smile had been wrong, not angry, not enraged, but triumphant, as if he had finally discovered how to remake her into something he could own. When he chained her wrists to the iron frame and traced those sigils onto her skin with a blade dipped in her own blood, something inside her cracked. Not the way a heart breaks, but the way bones shatter under too much weight. She realized he wasn't hurting her out of wrath. He was hurting her for purpose. When she awoke hours later on the cold cellar floor, wrists raw and mouth dry as ash, his voice floated down the steps, conversational and amused, telling his guards that the ritual would be ready in 2 nights, that the creature bound to the sigils would obey him once the final blood offering was completed. Her blood. That was when Alara ran. I remember the way the front doors slammed behind her, her bare feet slapping the gravel path as storm clouds gathered like an omen. The forest beyond the estate beckoned with a darkness that deterred even the bravest hunters, but she didn't hesitate. She fled into the trees, branches tearing at her arms, roots grasping at her ankles, the cold night turning her breath into broken glass. Villagers once whispered that ancient spirits moved through the forest, watching any who entered, weighing them like prey or petitioners. Alara prayed she would be seen as the latter. She stumbled for miles, chasing fragments of half-remembered lore her mother once murmured near the hearth, stories about a stone altar where a human could call upon the Night King in times of true despair, if their heart was honest and their bloodline marked by fate. She didn't know whether the altar was myth, but myth was safer than Varan's hands. By the time she reached the ancient clearing, her legs collapsed beneath her, her palms scraping against the cold slab of stone as she dragged herself onto it. Every breath rattled. Every heartbeat felt like it was leaking out of her injuries. The sky above twisted, the clouds curling into unnatural spirals as if the night itself leaned closer to listen. Trembling, she pressed her forehead to the altar and whispered the name no human had spoken aloud in generations. Caliph. Vampire King. Please, save me. And that is where everything changed. The wind halted mid-gust. The trees bowed. The shadows thickened into a shape taller than any mortal man. And when he materialized before her, pale as fractured moonlight, eyes burning like twin embers, his expression was not confusion, nor anger, but recognition so profound it rooted the earth beneath her. Because Alara did not know the truth, not yet, but she carried the bloodline of the woman who once saved his immortal life. And the Vampire King had come to collect a debt he had sworn never to fail. The night after the altar awakened, I watched the vampire's citadel stir in a way it hadn't in 100 years, its obsidian spires vibrating with a quiet, ancient power as King Caliph carried Alara through the grand archway, her body limp, dress soaked in rain and blood, her pulse flickering like the last ember in a dying fire. The guards parted instantly, not because he commanded it, but because none dared stand between the vampire king and the woman he held, as if she were something fragile, something precious, something that had no right to be bleeding in his arms. In the healing chamber, Caliph laid her gently upon a slab carved from moonstone, and the silvery glow bathed her injuries in a soft light that made the bruises along her cheek look like shadows of an eclipse. His hands, pale as winter frost, hovered over her ribs. Energy crackled under his palms, dark magic, old magic, the kind that hummed with runes only a king had the authority to wield. As the bruising faded and her breathing steadied, Caliph's expression shifted from stoic control to a tension I had never seen on the immortal ruler. "She bears her ancestors' scent," he murmured to his advisor, a tall vampire named Marchin, whose crimson eyes flicked nervously between his master and Alara. "A scent I thought long lost." Marchin swallowed hard. "My king, you're certain?" Caliph's jaw clenched, the acknowledgement alone answering the question. And that was when Alara's eyes fluttered open, confusion and terror flooding her gaze as she stared into the face of the most feared being in the realm. She recoiled, her breath catching, her bruised wrists trembling, but Caliph did not reach for her. Instead, he stepped back, as though giving her the choice to stand, flee, or strike him if she wished. "You summoned me," he said, voice low, ancient and steady, each word carrying the weight of forgotten centuries. "I came because your bloodline bound me to your call." Alara shook her head, her voice ragged. I didn't know. I didn't know where else to run." Caliph studied her face with an intensity that stripped her to the core, not in lust or hunger, but in recognition. "Your great ancestor, Selene of the Riverlands, once saved my life. A life debt sworn by a vampire king binds the bloodline across all generations." He paused, his expression darkening. "Your suffering became mine the moment he struck you." Alara's breath hitched, her fingers curling into the moonstone as memories of Varen's cellar clawed through her mind. Before she could speak, Caliph lowered himself to one knee beside the stone table, not an act of submission, but of solemnity. "Tell me," he murmured, "who hurt you?" And when she answered, the citadel trembled. Alara told him the truth in shaking fragments. How Varen had changed in recent months, how he'd begun speaking with men cloaked in red veils, how he'd locked himself in the cellar for hours, chanting things in a language that scraped at her bones. She described the symbols painted across the stone floor, the sickly glow that pulsed beneath her wrists, and the moment she realized the blood magic wasn't meant to harm her body, but bind her spirit to something monstrous. Caliph listened without interruption, but I saw the shadows around him thicken, responding to the fury that boiled beneath his ageless calm. "He sought to claim you," Caliph said, voice colder than a frozen grave. "And not merely his wife. He meant to anchor a demon through your blood." Alara's hand flew to her mouth as she stared at him, horrified. "Why me?" "Because your bloodline carries an ancient power," Marchin answered quietly. "A power Varen hoped to twist into a weapon." Caliph rose, his cloak whispering across the floor like a passing storm. "This is no simple cruelty," he continued. "Your husband traffics in forbidden rites, one's punishable by death across all realms." Alara tried to sit up, but he gently lifted his hand, and the magic of the moonstone eased her back into place. "Rest," he commanded softly. "Your body needs hours yet. I will see what must be done." But as he turned to leave, Alara's voice cracked through the chamber. "Don't go." Caliph froze, not because she commanded him, no mortal could, but because she sounded like someone who had never been protected a day in her life. Slowly, he turned back, his expression softening in ways that unsettled even his own court. "Alara," he said, stepping closer, "whatever binds you in fear now, it binds me too." The moonstone pulsed beneath her, warming her bruises as Caliph placed one faintly glowing hand near her heart, not touching, merely feeling the tremor of her soul. "You have my protection by oath," he whispered. "But more than that, you have my wrath." And in the silent dark of the healing chamber, as thunder rolled across the distant mountains, I realized something that made even me shudder. Caliph was not simply saving her. He was preparing for war. By the time dawn crept across Varen Estate, the air felt charged, as though the world itself braced for the reckoning about to unfold. Caliph arrived through swirling black mist, Alara at his side, the night guard fanning out behind them like living shadows bound to his will. Inside the estate's great hall, Varen waited beside a fully activated ritual circle, its symbols pulsing like veins fed by a diseased heart. For villagers hung in shackles along the wall, unconscious and marked with the same crimson sigils Alara had seen in the cellar. Varen welcomed them with a wicked grin, declaring that once the demon completed its binding, he, not the vampire king, would command the most powerful creature of the underworld. His arrogance echoed through the chamber, but Caliph's fury manifested only as a tightening of the air, as if every stone feared the consequences of what Varen had done. When Varen sliced his palm and slammed his blood into the sigil, the floor erupted with a thunderous crack. A monstrous demon tore free, limbs twisting like molten bone, its shriek rattling the chandeliers. And instead of heeding Varen's screams of command, it turned immediately toward Alara, drawn to her bloodline like a moth to flame. Caliph stepped in front of her, shadows whipping around him like armor, urging her to speak, to use the ancient lineage flowing in her veins. Terrified yet guided by something deeper, Alara raised her trembling voice and commanded the creature to stop. And impossibly, it obeyed. Strength and clarity surged through her as she ordered it to release the captives, then banish itself back to the void that spawned it. The demon dissolved into a distorted vortex of smoke and flame, leaving behind stunned silence. Varen, undone and frantic, lunged toward Alara in one desperate attempt to destroy what he could no longer control. Caliph caught him effortlessly, lifting him by the throat like a broken thing. But instead of crushing him, he turned to Alara. "His life is tied to your suffering," he said. "The judgment belongs to you." Alara's breath trembled as she faced the man who had tormented her, the man who had tried to sacrifice her soul. And with quiet, unshakable resolve, she chose her freedom. The corrupted magic Varen had wielded collapsed inward, consuming him in a burst of crimson fire until nothing but ash remained. Exhaustion overtook her, but Caliph caught her before she fell, holding her with a gentleness that defied every rumor of his cruelty. As the freed villagers awakened, staring in awe at the scene before them, Caliph whispered, "It's done. You are free." When Alara asked, voice barely steady, what her future could possibly look like now, Caliph brushed a soot-streaked strand of hair from her face with a touch impossibly soft for a king forged in darkness. "Whatever path you choose," he said quietly, "I will walk it with you, if you wish it." And as sunlight spilled into the shattered hall, warming her skin for the first time in years, Alara realized she had not simply survived. She had been delivered into a future where she would never have to stand alone again.